This is insane. There's just more games being postponed. What is it that we should be doing? Well, step one is you definitely shouldn't be panicking as FPL managers. FPL is an insane game and it is completely up to what is happening externally. You have no control over it as much as I don't have any control over it. So the first thing you need to do is take a breath and let the punches roll. There's lots of things to consider. So just think about it. Let's go through it in this video. There's tons to consider, and panicking just isn't going to help your FPL season. One thing that you should be doing is making these moves with conviction and surety, looking ahead to the future. In this video, we'll go over everything that might be worrying you, so don't stress, we've got you covered. So the first thing that I wanted to cover that probably every FPL manager is busy covering is, should you be wildcarding in game week 8? The first thing that you should be considering is, how many players do you actually have that are starting? Many people that I've spoken to have got 3 players missing, they've got 4 players missing, they've got a transfer or 2, they might be able to get to 7 playing players. And this is where fancy Premier League managers start panicking. They start taking needless hits. They start transferring in players that don't make sense. They start bringing in a player that might score this week but isn't a great option longer term. And really, we've just got to take a chill pill. In my mind, where you should be starting off, if you are watching this video, is to say, do you have at least 9 playing players with a transfer available, and can you get to that 10 mark? I actually think 9 is probably the magic number in which you don't really have to do anything and you might be at an advantage just not doing anything, keeping hold of your chip and rolling with that to allow you to make a lot more decisions when you're more informed. The other thing is that me as an FPL manager, I don't like to use my chips defensively. I'd way prefer to attack a proper double game week. And I would recommend the same for you. You could score a lot more points from a double game week with an informed player than you can trying to protect against some of the scores that other players might get. Because the player you bring in might only score 2 points, and then you'll heavily regret that. The second thing to consider are the players that you've got that aren't going to play. Who are they, and are they premiums? For example, if it's Salah, Trent Alexander-Arnold, James, even Will Zaha, is it worth even considering removing these players? The reason being, Liverpool play Brighton next week. And yes, Liverpool have not been in a great run of form, but you might find that this is where Salah starts to gain some of that form back. And who's going to assist him? It'll be Trent Alexander-Arnold, who might pop up with the goal himself. You might be getting rid of Liverpool players this week only to miss quite a favorable fixture for them next week, which could run you into hot water. The other one to consider is Reece James. A lot of people are actually targeting them in the upcoming game weeks, and you might be transferring them out, leaving yourself in a weaker position than what you were in before you started to make some of these changes. So it's just worth considering before you make some of these moves is, what are these guys worth it for your team in the future? And are they actually in some of the wildcard drafts that the guys are punting for the future? The third point, just make sure that the players that you're transferring in or out don't have a good run of fixtures, because you just might be needlessly wasting a transfer when you could potentially be fixing a hole in your team, like a non-playing keeper or a non-playing defender, rather than trying to sew up your team by targeting some of the must-own players. The last thing to consider is Spurs. So Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, those 2 players could really hurt a lot of people in the game week. And is it worth trying to target the guys for this week? But potentially, what does that mean for your team going forward? So yes, you might be able to get that juicy Harry Kane captaincy for game week 8, but from game week 9, they don't necessarily have the greatest fixtures, and potentially you want Salah back, you might want De Bruyne, you might want Fernandes from United. So it just leaves you with a lot less room to maneuver if you do target those players. And that might be why you want to consider your free hit ahead of your other transfer. Looking ahead, I've just done a quick game week 8 draft in terms of what I think is going to be the best options to go through. At the back, I've kept Henderson. And the major reason I've kept Henderson is to really keep the options open. I really want to keep enough money on the bench to transfer Mo Salah back. You'll see in this draft, I've been able to put Kane and Son in this particular draft, but I've got a view of moving into Salah into game week 9, and then from there making some decisions around the rest of my funds. If Kane continues to bring his form to the table, it might be worth keeping him and not bringing Son in. But really, the whole idea around the cheaper goalkeeper ahead of Nick Pope is to allow myself some options going into game week 9 and choosing some of those players. I've gone for Cucurella at the back. I would have loved Reece James, but he doesn't quite fit in the side. Cucurella and Graham Potter obviously had a bit of a love affair at their Brighton time together, and I'm sure Graham Potter is going to be very eager to have his talisman back in his team to be able to perform in the way that he was able to under Graham Potter. Trippier, probably the most targeted player in the game, he definitely stays in my side. He might be a little bit more expensive in your side. That's all down to team value and what makes sense in your team. Emerson, 4.0, West Ham player, just makes a hell of a lot of sense from my perspective to keep in your side. It also means that you can do, for example, Perisic into Emerson going forward. If you can see during the weekday games that Perisic did not start the weekday fixture and that there isn't an injury concern ahead of Saturday, Perisic could really hurt a lot of teams. So my idea would be Emerson for the bus team, see what the team news says, and then from there, make your calls, make your decisions. At the back, Zaha, just because of Palace's lovely turn of fixtures, he's going to be a fantastic asset to own going forward. Next to him, I've got Rashford. There is concern that there is a niggle on Rashford, so you might need to move him on for another player in his price bracket. But if he is fit, I think that he's a fantastic option, being the talisman up front there for United. I've got Martinelli because he's impossible to remove from a side. He just adds so much value at that price point. And even if Arsenal's fixtures do tend to get a little bit hairy from here, I think it makes a hell of a lot of sense keeping Martinelli in the side. As you can see, I've got Son in my side. I've got him as captain at the moment. I don't think that that's going to stay. It would be Kane for me ahead of Son, but it's just what it says on this particular graphic. I finally got my boy Mitrovic in the team, which makes me very excited as a Fulham supporter. I've been going nuts for all the goals that he's been scoring, and I'd love for that to also resonate with my FPL side. Then I've got Kane. As I say, he's predicted to score 6.2 weeks in this game week, which is actually ahead of Haaland, making him a fantastic FPL option going forward. Next to him, Haaland, he's not going anywhere. Most informed player in the world. He definitely needs to stay. Ward at the back, he might lose his place to Iverson, and it might make sense downgrading Ward to Iverson, and it's just something to consider, and you might be able to fit James into your side. Nico Williams stays in my team, great enabler. Perisic, as mentioned, he would be a starter if the team news makes sense, but from a bus team perspective, I don't want to run into hot water when the team news comes out and he is starting. And my boy Andreas, you could definitely start him in this game week. For example, Zaha isn't going to be playing. I thought it might be rescheduled, but you could definitely put in Andreas ahead of Zaha and just run with that fixture. Looking ahead, if you do still have your wild card, this is the game week that I would target to use it in. Once you've decided to do it, make sure you click that play wildcard button as early as possible. I've got a guide in the description. And the idea would be that you're going to take advantage of as many of the price rises and avoid as many of the price falls as possible. And that's why the international break makes so much sense to me. Another thing that always happens in an international break is a key player picks up an injury. So it might be Ronaldo, it might be Zaha, it might be any of the players that we've just spoken about in the wildcard. And that's why I would specifically wait for international break and game week 9 to play my wildcard. One of the other things to consider is that hits actually only cost you -2. Now you might say, Alan, you're mad. It actually costs you -4. Just hear me out. If your player isn't starting, that's going to be a fat 0 that he scores. However, if he is starting, that'll be 2 points. So it's 2 points versus the 0-pointed starter, 4-point hits. That 2-point offset means it's actually only a -2 to your team and means that it's not a bad option to use this to take a couple of hits in your side. I've always done it where you take some hits in the blank game weeks and it's always paid off for me. From a game week 9 perspective, you've got to be targeting 2 of the informed sides. That would be Crystal Palace and Newcastle. So from a Crystal Palace perspective, you could take a look at Guaita at the back in terms of their goalkeeper, or potentially Mateta up front, or Edouard. But the player that I would be targeting, and that is in my team, is Will Zaha. I think he's going to continue to bring the business and is definitely the player you should be targeting. From a Newcastle perspective, they've got tons of great options actually. Even Almiron, Saint Maximum, just to name a couple. Shah at the back. You never know. It could be some of the great options, but the ones I would be targeting would be Trippier, who has just kept rising in price. Pope in the back and in the goal, and Isak up front, who looks like a fantastic option as a forward, potentially as a replacement for Tony or Mitrovic. It's something worth considering. And then the last thing is Spurs. You won't want them going forward, in my opinion, from game week 9 onwards. There's tons of better options. Harry Kane is an exception because he's almost a form over fixture kind of player, can score against anybody. But we've seen recently that Heung-min Son has been rotated quite a bit. That is potentially not worth keeping in your side. Even for me, Perisic is somebody that I might consider moving on going forward. And I've just taken a look, and we're just going to go over this side and just go over a couple of the key differences, in my opinion, from a Game Week 8 versus a Game Week 9 draft. This Game Week 9 draft to me looks far stronger than the Game Week 8 draft and carries you forward until that international break where you get to play that second wild card and shore up your team with some of the players that you might have missed or some of the players that were in form. But this is what I would be targeting from a Game Week 9 perspective. As you can see, I've doubled up on Trippier and Pope, and I think that's essential. You've got to be owning those two. I've managed to squeeze in both James and Cancelo into the side. I would have loved to also have Trent in the side, but, you know, that's not always possible. Will Zaha in the middle, you'll see his fixtures are fantastic from here on out. Rashford at the back. United's continue to look good, and he's an out-of-position midfielder that looks good to still continue to keep his spot up front. There's a fantastic option in your side. Martinelli, like I mentioned, is not going anywhere, and you'll see I've kept Salah. I think he's going to do well in that Brighton game and could potentially see his form switch. He has been the best FPL asset for a number of years now, and there's nothing to say that he can't turn this form around. And all of us managers who've transferred him out are going to be incredibly sad once that happens, and that might be where you'd be able to jump up in rank against those around you. We've got Mitro, Jesus, and Haaland at the back. I want to keep Jesus just for a little bit longer, keep the faith. You could bring in Tony in this spot, or you could bring in Isak. At the back, I've really wanted to ensure that I've got as much options as possible on the bench. So I've got Ward playing keeper. We've spoken about him plenty. Emerson, also spoken about him plenty. I think he's going to continue starting for West Ham. Fofana, cheap enabler from a Chelsea perspective, could be a great option, an enabler to try and get the most out of your team like I've managed to do here. Andreas, he's just such a great option at 4.6 on the bench. Definitely the best 4.6 option. And I think that's it, guys, in terms of just the wildcard options. From my perspective, just to recap, if you've got at least 7 players starting, then to me, that extra transfer takes you to 8. You maybe take a hit, you get to 9. You can ride through this tricky period and don't panic too much. If you've got as many as 6 players not starting and you're only able to field 5, you've got to take a look at using your free hit, which I would recommend targeting those Spurs players, or wildcarding early and taking a look at that template we mentioned previously. The option that I would prefer is if you're looking at that 7 to 9 spots, roll that transfer, go into Game Week 9 to try and get a team very similar to this, to really bolster up your rank and enable you into those future fixtures. Guys, I've been Len. This has been the Young Millionaires Bible FPL channel. If you guys have enjoyed, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for plenty more content to come in future. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.